What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content that I'm uploading onto my channel, then feel free to subscribe, and you can also offer suggestions on topics and characters and storylines and whatnot that we can have discussions on later on in this channel.
All right, Rob Core. Everybody really seemed to like Moon Knight. I'm really liking Moon Knight. Never in a million years would I have sat down and said, dude, I'm really hyped for Moon Knight. Like, you never would have heard me say that. Like, yeah, man, Moon Knight, son. Like, I never would have said that. Fanboy. But Jeff Lemire's Moon Knight is like an M. Night Shyamalan movie, except not bad. Like, it is, well, no, I will say Split was super good. That movie was a lot better than I thought it would be, especially the ending. Oh my God, if you guys saw Split, dude, the ending of that movie, man, like it's M. Night Shyamalan. I really hope this is not a fluke. I hope you are back on your A game. Jeff Lemire toys with us so bad. So here's the deal. This is a 4-part story, and we're gonna be bouncing around and fluctuating, and it's one of these things where like almost nothing seems to make sense until we get to like near the end, and then it all makes sense. And it's just like, oh, like the light bulb comes on, right? And it's just like, oh, okay, I understand what's going on. So the first thing we do is we pick up with this terrible Moon Knight movie, and it's kind of funny because Jeff Lemire is like, if a Moon Knight movie came out, it would probably be bad. Not only that, remember, Steve Grant is like the millionaire persona of Moon Knight. Because keep in mind, Mark Spector as a person has like 3 personalities. You've got Jake Lockley, you've got Steve Grant, and then you just have like, you know, the Mark Spector guy. Now, the cool thing about this is actually we're gonna be introduced to like a new persona that we don't really know anything about, at least not that I'm aware of us knowing anything about. But Steve Grant is who we pick up here right now. And Steve Grant's basically the producer on the set of a Moon Knight movie. And this is cool because he's talking to his girlfriend Marlene, and it's really meta. You know, he's like, I never should have let Marvel talk me into that mess. He's on the set of a Moon Knight movie being made by Marvel Studios. And so I don't know if Jeff Lemire's like, hey guys, in case you didn't know, we're getting a Moon Knight movie. Like, I mean, I'd rather watch like a Moon Knight Netflix series than a movie, because you couldn't do enough with a movie. People would just be like, well, that was weird as shit. Like, if you had a Netflix series, people would be like, yeah, man, like it was 13 episodes of like absolute insanity, and I loved it. Like, I'm really hoping we get a Netflix series. But, you know, I don't know if this is Jeff Lemire telling us anything or if it's him just having fun. It really seems to be more of like Jeff Lemire just having fun, which is cool. It's just good old-fashioned enjoyment. But for Steve Grant, he's overwhelmed by the situation because, you know, the acting's bad, the writing is bad, the actors are bad, the director's bad. It's just everything is bad, you know, and it's just like one problem after another. But ultimately, you know, he tells Marlene, look, I got to go get my bearings. I need to go relax. Not only that, you know, Marlene's kind of trying to talk him into the position of like firing the director and taking over directorship of the role himself. And so for them, you know, it's really just kind of trying to get everything in order, you know, him trying to clear his head. There really doesn't seem to be a whole lot to this until we find out that they're actually going to be going to a huge gala of sorts that's going to be designed for the purpose of promoting the Moon Knight film as an advocate for mental health. To basically say, hey, look, here is the struggle that people with mental health deal with. We want this movie to serve as a platform to both be entertaining, but to educate people about the struggles of mental health and then raise awareness. Well, I wouldn't really agree with the term raising awareness. Raising awareness just tells people about shit they already know. Like, I mean, actually doing something about it is what people are going for. But the whole idea is that once they get into this taxi cab, you know, the idea is that this thing's going to be held at St. Mercy's. Now, the cool thing about this is that St. Mercy's is not new. St. Mercy's has a long history in Marvel Comics, and it's like this all roads lead to Rome kind of thing, you know, in the sense that it's like, you know, no one really wants to go to Mercy Hospital, and the reason why is because Mercy Hospital is where Mark Spector was at in the last volume when he was losing his mind. Not only that, Steve Grant is in a taxi cab with Jake Lockley. Remember, Jake Lockley is one of the personas of Mark Spector. Steve Grant is one of the personas of Mark Spector. So it's like his personas are hanging out with each other, and it's like, what the hell is going on? Because then suddenly we pick up with Jake Lockley in a taxi cab, and it's insane because as he's going through, he's giving us like this Jake Lockley persona. Now keep in mind, when it comes to Lockley, it's very grounded, it's very street. You could almost read his stories as like a 1950s noir kind of thing, you know, where it's like, I'm driving down the streets at night and all I see is crime, you know, that kind of thing, kind of like those old school black and white detective movies, and it really gives a cool feel to it. It really changes things. But again, we also see him meeting up with Crawley. Now, of course, the last we saw, Crawley sold his soul to Anubis so that Mark Spector and everybody could escape the hospital. So it's like, what in the hell is going on right now? Like Jeff Lemire, man, like Jeff Lemire was confusing the heck out of me when I was going through and I was reading the story. But what seems to be happening is Crawley seems to be like the anchor to reality to a degree, you know, in the sense that Crawley basically tells Jake Lockley, I don't know what's going on with you right now, but you're Mark Spector. I sold my soul to Anubis so that you could get away. And so it's almost like, from our persona, from Crawley's persona, Jake Lockley's lost his mind. He's absolutely insane. But in the end, Crawley's like, okay, look, you need to work this out. Like, you have to work this concept out. And so the notion seems to be that, I don't know if Crawley's like another entity or whatever it is, but it seems like Crawley is basically going to this Jake Lockley character and saying he has to work out this fantasy. He has to discover who he is. It's almost like Shutter Island. And I'm not going to spoil Shutter Island for the people who haven't seen it, but it's very Shutter Island-like in terms of how this functions. But the fact remains here, Jake Lockley says, look, I have to don my Moon Knight costume and I have to go be the hero and I have to go, solve crimes during the night. We suddenly switch back to Steve Grant. And this is where things fall further and further down this rabbit hole, just tumbling down this rabbit hole. And Steve Grant is, it seems like he's picking up in the middle of something, like he suddenly snapped back to where he's at the moment. And when Marlene asks him what's going on, he's like, I don't know. Like, I was a man in a cab and I met a guy with white hair and he says that I was in a mental hospital. And so it's crazy because it's like all these personalities are encountering each other, are meeting each other. Now, the cool thing about this is Jeff Lemire, I'm getting lost in these personalities. Jeff Lemire is drawing on a classic example of how people deal with dissociative personality disorder. A classic instance of dealing with multiple personalities is forcing the personalities to meet one another. I wouldn't say that I'm like extremely knowledgeable about mental health psychiatry, but from what I've read, when it comes to people with multiple personality disorder, a way to basically eliminate multiple personalities, or at least a way that's believed to eliminate multiple personalities, is to make the personalities confront one another. And then they all basically realize they're all the same person, because what people with dissociative personality disorder do is they create barriers. No personality ever crosses over. In one moment, they're one personality. In another moment, they're a different personality, but they're never both at the same time. And so that seems to be the road that Jeff Lemire is taking, is it's basically having all these personalities converge and meet one another. Now, what purpose is served by this, I don't know. Well, at least we don't know right now. But what we do is we pick up with Mercy Hospital, and we basically have Steve Grant here. Now, the issue is that with Steve Grant being at this hospital, he's met by Billy and Bobby. Now, of course, we saw in the last volume that Billy and Bobby were orderlies working at the hospital that were there to keep Mark Spector contained, there to keep him from getting away. So again, it's really like Jeff Lemire's toying with this idea. Is he still crazy? Is he still losing his mind? Is everything that we're seeing right now an illusion? Is he really just a guy sitting in a straitjacket in a padded room? That's what I was expecting. I was expecting at the end of all this that he was just going to be in a padded room in a straitjacket, and all of this has just been an illusion, and he's just shifting from one personality to the next. But with Steve Grant being confronted by these guys, by Billy and Bobby, with them saying they recognize him, he goes to Marlene and says, I don't understand what in the world is going on right here. Who chose to host this thing in a mental institution? Marlene says, well, you did, because you thought it was the best place to host this because you were a patient here at one point in time. Like, you were a patient at this mental institution. And so it's just like, wow. Wow. And so it's just, that's why, oh my God, Rob Core, it gets better. It gets better and better and better and better. This is why I say things get kind of crazy. So if you feel baffled, bear with me on this, because all this is going to make sense. Picking up with this realization of what's going on, of course, Steve Grant's just like, I have no idea what's happening right now. But before he can really answer any questions or get any answers, he suddenly met with the director. Now, this is pretty straightforward. He basically cans him, says, hey, look, man, you're fired. You're out of here. Like, you are not going to be directing this movie anymore. I'm taking your place. And so following this, it's really just Steve Grant having to clear his head, because I mean, you got to think from his perspective, he's hosting a gala at a mental institution that he was apparently a patient at. He's having flashbacks to being a taxi cab driver, meeting a guy named Crawley who says that he sold his soul to Anubis. He had to fire the director of his film, so he's got to take on that responsibility. It's a million things all going on at the same time. But the issue is that once he gets to the exit door and he goes outside to take a break, he suddenly walks out onto the moon. And it's just like, why is he on the moon right now? Well, apparently this personality, the one that's not really given a name, this personality is essentially here fighting against werewolves that are attacking a moon base. Why they're attacking the moon base, we actually find out is being behind the idea that they apparently invaded Earth, that these wolves had invaded the planet Earth, they had infected everybody, turned them all into werewolves. This guy, who apparently is called Mark Spector, had basically grabbed what was left of humanity, took them all to a moon colony, and he and these moon knights, as they're called, are the last survivors of Earth, trying to fend off this invasion from these wolves that are descending from Earth and trying to wipe out what's left of humanity. Now, this gets absolutely insane, and the reason why is because in the the back of this ship that he's piloting is Frenchie. Now, we know Frenchie DeChamp was a guy that Mark had served time with in the military. And so because of this, it kind of bounces back and forth in the sense that we had the Jake Lockley persona and Frenchie in the back seat, along with this Mark Spector persona and Frenchie in the back seat of this ship. And it's this blurry line between what's real and what's not real. Is he really, in a ship somewhere? Is he really in a taxi cab? The reason why Jeff Lemire is doing this is because this is designed to show us what people with mental health do. If you're a person that suffers from multiple personality disorder, which one's real? Which one's the real personality? If I suddenly introduced you to 5 versions of yourself, if I said, hey, if I had 5 people that looked exactly like you, and I said, hey, this one is a taxi cab driver, and this one's the CEO of a corporation, and this one's president of the United States, and I said, each one of these guys are real, you would be adamant that they're not real. You're like, no, they're not real, I'm real. Well, are you real? Is it true? Or are one of those guys the real you? That's what Jeff Lemire is going for. It's confusing and it drives us absolutely bonkers. But the issue here is that this is bouncing back and forth between this real and false story. It's giving us a tour through the mind of a person that deals with mental health issues. And that's why Jeff Lemire's Moon Knight is so good, is because it gives us this journey that we've never really had before. I've skimmed through enough Moon Knight stories to know that as far as I'm aware, no one's ever told a Moon Knight story like this. It's always been like, there's a Steve Grant persona and there's a Jake Lockley persona, and they all function in accordance with each other. When Mark Spector needs to know what's going on the streets, he dons the Jake Lockley persona and he goes into his taxi cab and he goes and learns about what's going on. When he needs to be the corporate guy, when he needs to be the legitimate face of his operation, he's Steve Grant. When he's really Mark Spector, he's Moon Knight. And so it creates this really cool side-by-side comparison. But for the most part, we have all these different personalities converging onto one another. And so the issue here is that we're kind of faced with this notion that we feel like we're going insane reading this story about a man who, for all intents and purposes, is insane. And so what happens is we pick back up with Jake Lockley again as he makes his way to Gina's diner. Because remember, in the whole Jake Lockley persona, Gina is his contact. She's the person that he goes to and says, what have you heard, from the whisperings of people who have been in your diner? What's going on? But the issue is that when he gets in there, everyone, including Gina, is dead. All these people are all dead. And almost immediately after this happens, the cops are like, we know you're in there. Come out with your hands up. Now, of course, he ends up surrendering and he's taken to a police station, but he's confronted with this Mark Spector persona. Jake Lockley is adamant that he's Jake Lockley. He is so sure that he's Jake Lockley. The issue with this is that he's being told by Billy and Bobby, who are here yet again, he's being told by Detective Emmett, who was previously a doctor in the last volume, he's being told he's Mark Spector. His name is Mark Spector. That the taxi cab he drives is registered under the name of Jake Lockley, but he's Mark Spector. Not only that, he's wearing a Moon Knight uniform. Now, the reason why, or at least he has a Moon Knight uniform, the reason why this matters is because they don't know who Moon Knight is. They don't know anything about the concept of Moon Knight. All they know is that there is a guy who's running around in the middle of the night murdering people. In addition to this, when he was being brought in, he was spouting off about, fighting against werewolves and all this kind of stuff. And so for everyone who looked at him, when they hear him saying, well, werewolves are attacking the moon, I have to stop him, they consider him to be crazy. They're like, this guy's spouting off about nonsense. He's going off about absolutely nothing. Now, this is one of the coolest moments in the whole story that comes up right now. While he's talking to this detective, he's adamant and saying, look, they were my friends. I would have no reason to kill them. Get me my lawyer. Get me my lawyer, Matt Murdock. Get me Matt Murdock in here. But then suddenly we snap back to Steve Grant in the middle of him taking over this directorship position. And the guy that he's talking to is like, hey, look, I'm sorry, I flubbed my lines, I'll get them right. And he says, okay, that's fine. Action. And they cut right back to the Jake Lockley persona in the middle of this interrogation. And so it's just like, Jeff Lemire, Jeff Lemire's a madman, but the story's written so cool and it's written in such a great way. But ultimately, when he's told, look, there's a guy, a midnight man, as he's referred to, running around in the night killing people, Jake Lockley says, well, I'm Moon Knight. I'm a good guy. I'm Moon Knight. I'm a good guy. I have to be Moon Knight. I have to go stop this midnight man. And so the way it's written, it's like he's trying to grasp to these vestiges of what he considers to be his reality. He's trying to keep himself sane. Of course, he overpowers the guards. He overpowers Officer Emmett. He dons the Moon Knight uniform and he just takes off into the street. Now, of course, he runs into Crawley and he says, hey, look, someone's going around hunting people. And so it's like he's devolved back into his Moon Knight persona. And this is when we kind of get this anchor back to reality. Because with Jeff Lemire, the way he's writing this story, it's so easy to just kind of get lost in what's going on where you don't know what's real, you don't know what's not real. Crawley kind of anchors us back in. Jeff Lemire's like, hey, look, I'll let you guys swim out, 50 feet out, but you can't go 51 feet. You can't go 55 feet. I'm going to anchor you back in. And Crawley's the way that we do that. And so Crawley's like, so you still don't understand that none of this is real. And so he's like, okay, fine. You need to continue acting out this fantasy. Now, who Crawley is, we don't know. Not at the moment. But Crawley seems to be the anchor to reality. He keeps saying, I really hope that you would basically come out of this. I really hope that you had made made improvements, but apparently you're still just as insane as you ever were. And so he says, go to this address, go directly to this address. Now the issue is that as soon as he, gets to this location, he runs across the Midnight Man, who has Marlene, and as he's trying to confront the Midnight Man, we switch back to the movie set and we have Moon Knight going against the Midnight Man on this movie set. And so it's just like, what in the hell? Like it's insane the way that all this is going on, because then we have Steve Grant reacting to a bite on his neck, which had happened to this Mark Spector guy when he was on the moon fighting these werewolves. And we transition back to the werewolves. And so what happens is Jeff Lemire kind of fast tracks all this. He jumps from one personality to the next extremely fast. We have Mark Spector on the moon. We have him, walking through a door, and then we have Steve Grant, panicking because of everything that's going on. And so something that I hope you notice is that all these personalities are converging into a single location. They're all running to the same door. And once they all come out of these respective doors, they run into the real Mark Spector, the actual tried and true Mark Spector. Now, this is why I say you had to bear with me on this, because this was the only way I knew how to make this make sense. The real Mark Spector, the one who's real, the tangible superhero, that is the guy who's wearing all white and has that white band-aid on his nose. The Moon Knight that's here, Jake Lockley, the space pilot, Steve Grant, they're all personas. They're all just people that exist in the mind of Mark Spector. And Mark Spector says, none of you are real. You're all personalities that I've created. You're all constructs that I've made. Now, of course, Jake Lockley lashes out and says, no way this is true. There's no way this is true. But this is Mark Spector basically forcing all of his personalities to converge in a single location. And the reason why is because he's killing them off. He's getting rid of his alternate personalities. He's making himself whole again. That's very much what this was. Jeff Lemire is drawing this juxtaposition between like multiple personalities and Horcruxes. Horcruxes is a really good example. When Voldemort made Horcruxes, he confined a portion of his soul into inanimate objects. That was basically what was happening with the mind of Mark Spector. Every time he created a new personality, his mind was less whole. He lost a little bit of it, and to the point that he basically lost himself. And that's what this whole story is, him losing his mind. Jake Lockley dressed as Moon Knight, Steve Grant, the millionaire, the billionaire, Mark Spector, the pilot. These are all constructs that he made. Now, the pilot is a fairly new one. He doesn't know anything about him and just kind of whisks him away. Says, look, I don't know who you are. I don't believe you're real anymore. And the pilot's gone. When it came to Jake Lockley, it was wholly different. What Mark Spector says is that he created, or at least the Jake Lockley persona was like the second personality that manifested. And the reason why it manifested is because he became Moon Knight, but he realized that he couldn't just go out and fight crime. He needed to be a guy that was able to gain information on the ground level. And so he's effectively fighting his Moon Knight personality. And so with Jake Lockley lashing out, refusing to believe that he's not real, Mark Spector confronts him with violence. He's able to topple, Jake Lockley. He's able to defeat him, kills him with the Moon Knight version of batarangs, and that's going to piss off so many Moon Knight fans. And the result is that he basically kills the Jake Lockley persona. Now, the only one left is Steve Grant. Now, Steve Grant is the most important one. And the reason why is because as Mark Spector travels through this weird location, because again, Jeff Lemire doesn't tell us where this place is. We don't know where this place is. It could very well be on the ethereal plane. It could be in the overvoid where the gods live. It could be any number of places. But once he reaches Steve Grant, he basically says, you were the first personality that I manifested. You manifested when I was a child. I thought you were originally an imaginary friend, but as time progressed, I began to become you. And that was the issue. These weren't just personalities that served a purpose. In the old Moon Knight stories, if you go back and read those, Mark Spector acts as Steve Grant in the same way that Batman acts as Bruce Wayne. Mark Spector acts as Jake Lockley in the same way that Batman acts as Bruce Wayne. They were just alter egos as he considered them. The issue was that the longer he had the personalities of Steve Grant and Jake Lockley, the longer they had their own memories, their own lives. And so that's what Jeff Lemire is doing. He's clearing the air. He's saying, okay, these personalities believed that they were real. Jake Lockley had his own backstory, his own origin. Steve Grant had his own backstory, his own origin. From their perspective, they were real. But Mark Spector says, no. You are a personality that I made. You are a personality that I gave life to. And you are a personality that got carried away with itself to the point that I couldn't control you anymore. And so he says, I've essentially lost myself. The only way for me to be whole is to get rid of you. Is to get rid of the Steve Grant persona. And so what Lemire is doing here is, at least in this story anyway, he's saying that everything that we've read in the Moon Knight events up until this point, everything we've read up until this moment, everything involving Steve Grant, everything involving Jake Lockley, none of it was real. The only thing that seems real is Mark Spector. The only thing that seems to be real, or that is real, is Mark Spector, the man in white with a white band-aid on his nose. He's the only real one. And so ultimately this ends with the, quote unquote, death of Steve Grant. And it ends with Mark Spector saying, now it's time for me to go wage war against Khonshu. Now it's time for me to kill this god that made me his herald, set me on this path, drove me insane, basically fractured my mind, it's time for me to right everything. With that being said, guys, Moon Knight is a descent into total madness, but I didn't know how else to do this instead of, without just kind of going over what was happening and then rectifying it all at the end. So hopefully that ending made sense, but I imagine a lot of you will probably have questions, so feel free to post your questions down in the comment section. If there's a question that gets posted and I don't get a chance to answer it, somebody else answer it for him, because I want to make sure you guys understand what's going on, because it's a beautifully written story, but it's one of these things where it can be difficult to wrap your head around, and I imagine, with a lot of people having questions, I don't want you guys to feel left out. So, post those questions down in the comment section. If you feel baffled, I'll try to rectify that as best I can. But yeah, if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.